Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for everyone who's joining us today. Hope you're having a wonderful day so far. My name is Jeff Cook, Marketing Specialist here at SmartSimple. All right, so before we begin, there are just a couple housekeeping items I'd like to cover. Just to let you all know, this webinar will be recorded and a recording will be made available a few days afterwards. And you're most welcome and encouraged to ask your questions over the course of the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box in the Zoom webinar console. We'll be sure to address any of your questions following Colton's presentation. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about what SmartSimple is and what we do. We've been in operation for over 15 years, offering integrated grants and donor management solutions to not only community foundations, but also private and family foundations, Fortune 100 companies, and governmental organizations. We often say that our clients come to us for the technology and stay for the relationship, being the only vendor in our space to offer live technical support 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. From our perspective, what makes us stand out from others is a perfected balance between technology and the support you need. And we're confident that you'll be pressed to find such service elsewhere. Our unique approach has led us to build a tight-knit community of over 300 clients who support over 115,000 users every month in nearly 200 countries. And let me just ask you a question. Is your foundation currently looking for a better way to measure your impact? Well, you're not alone. According to the Foundation Review, 71% of foundations feel the way that they measure impact still isn't adequate despite making strong efforts to do so. Next week, we're holding a 45-minute webinar on how SmartSimple's own unique impact measurement framework can help equip your foundation with the methodology and tool set to quantify, analyze, and visualize your impact data. We've actually received quite a lot of interest from folks for this webinar, so be sure not to miss this one. To register and learn more, visit bit.ly/impact-APR11. I hope to have you join us next week. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Colton Strawser. Hi, Colton.
Hey, Jeff.
Great. Colton is the president of his own nonprofit and communications consulting firm, Colton Strawser Consulting, dedicated to empowering organizations to change the world. Over the years, he's held various management positions with foundations and nonprofits and spoken at conferences such as CF United, which we attended a couple of weeks ago, on topics such as nonprofit and foundation management, strategic grant making, and youth philanthropy. He's a certified fundraising executive, professor of nonprofit management and leadership, and a proud Indiana native who currently calls California his home. All right, so without further ado, take it away, Colton.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So I'm going to cover a lot today in a short amount of time. A 30-minute webinar is always fun and interesting to cover a lot of content in a very quick amount of time, but we're going to do the best we can. So aligning community foundation goals and staff for greater impact. And so like I said, I have 30 minutes. I'm not going to cover everything out there that can be done to better align what we do in our community foundation. However, I do hope to share a few tips, highlight a few examples of what some foundations that I've either worked with or worked for are doing, and then take a few questions at the end. And so my contact information is at the end of this webinar, so if you do have any questions whatsoever, feel free to send me an email afterwards. I can send you just some resources or answer some questions that you may have. And like Jeff mentioned, I do encourage you to submit a Q&A within the webinar, and we'll get to the questions at the end. So for those of you who may be new to community foundations or unaware of the model of community foundations, they're generally philanthropic institutions focused on fostering philanthropy within a specific region. And so oftentimes that looks different from community foundation to community foundation. And I often say if you've met one community foundation, you've only met one community foundation because they're all so different. In Indiana, for example, where I'm from, we have a community foundation in each county. There's 92 counties in Indiana, but we have 94 community foundations. If you do the math, some communities have more than one. And so that's an interesting model. Other states have a statewide community foundation with affiliate funds. Some have, north-south, they have city-specific, and so that's why I just use the term geographic region. And so communities define it in a million different ways, and so community foundations do that as well. So for many community foundations, they serve as a vehicle through which donors can distribute their philanthropy now in the future. And so many community foundations are set up in perpetuity, where if you make a gift to the foundation, it will be invested wisely, and the interest from that will be used for grant making. Oftentimes, the most popular things that we see are donor advice funds, scholarship funds, field of interest funds, which are areas of interest such as education, youth, animals, things like that for a specific focus. There's agency endowment funds, which are either created by a donor to benefit a specific nonprofit, or they're created by a nonprofit to benefit themselves. And then there's unrestricted funds, which is the liquid gold of community foundations. Some foundations now are creating named funds, and so you can have like the Colton Strawser unrestricted fund at a community foundation. It's still used in the competitive grant making cycle, but it's a way to honor the donation from the donor too. So that's something that's happening as well. So with this community foundation model, it kind of has a challenge with it too. It's really great that donors can come into a community foundation's door and say, hey, I want to do this in the community, can you help me? Oftentimes the answer is yes, let's see what we can do. But with that, the challenge of being all things to all people as a community foundation can send us in 100 different directions. And so when it comes to aligning goals and strategies within a foundation, sometimes that's easier said than done, because everyone that comes in your door is coming for a different reason usually. And so keeping that in mind, that this work of aligning strategy is not easy, but it can be done over time. So with that being said, in order to move forward with some of the strategy development, you have to have a strategic plan or an action plan, which is kind of like a baby version of a strategic plan. So I have a couple things up here. One quote that one of my mentors told me many years ago is, hope is not a strategy. And so you can't hope something works. You have to make it work, figure out how to make it work, partner with others to make it work. And so, a goal without a plan is just a wish. We can't be, hoping and dreaming that things in our community will just get better over time, organically. Sometimes we have to have a plan in order to make things happen. And so the other one goes back to SMART goals, SMART objectives, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. We don't want our strategic plans to sit on a shelf and collect dust over time, and so we want them to be action-oriented. We want them to create community change. And so I think having a strategic plan also helps you align your goals better, because you've identified them and then you're putting resources towards them. So in order to get all these ducks in a row, your fundraising goals and your strategic plan should be aligned. So, I've seen in some cases where the community foundation strategic plan is kind of, it's broad. It's almost too broad, where it's like, yeah, this could happen, but will it happen because you did something, or will it just happen because, it's meant to happen? And so, if your strategic plan for the next 5 years is, say that, your schools in your community are struggling, and, they really need some help, some funding, maybe in your strategic plan, there's a goal in there to help improve community schools in the community. And so that's our goal. We want better schools, better after-school care, ensuring teachers have all the supplies they need in their classroom. That's our strategic goal. And so when it comes back to fundraising, the development department is then tasked with helping to go out there and raise the funds for that specific thing. And so I worked for a small community foundation, so oftentimes the development department, the program department was like the same thing, same person. And so, just trying to figure out how to make those asks of saying, hey, our community foundation for the next few years, we're really dedicated to improving our schools. Can you get on board with that? Or, can you help us? And things like that. And so you've created a strategic, plan strategy where you want to improve schools, but then the fundraising has to come alongside that. So, when you're speaking with donors, sharing with them that goes into my next point about your goals publicly and often. Tell people what progress you're making, give them updates, let them know, how you're making an impact and how they can help you with that. But I think before you do that, to my third point, you have to do your research on the size and the shape that the planning table needs to be. And then you also need to determine who is invited. And so, sometimes, community foundations are really great conveners and catalysts for community change. And so, figuring out who to bring at the table in order to tackle whether it's, the drug epidemic in the community, improving schools, increasing access to high quality early childhood education, there's plenty of opportunities there, to create a table and space to have those conversations. And so after you kind of put your plan together, create a milestone and goal of what you want to achieve. And so, people love a good countdown, I always say. And so, if your goal is to raise $100,000 to create an early childhood development fund, let people know how you're doing towards that. Are you going to oversubscribe? Are you going to, do some matching grants? Is there some, some type of countdown to build sort of interest and anticipation? Also, community foundations have a lot more, than money. And so if you don't have a lot of time or a lot of money, consider tying into your existing community plans. This is one thing I don't see community foundations doing a lot, and it saves them a ton of time, money, and strategic thinking. So oftentimes communities have plans such as economic development plans, tourism plans, school and university plans. Look at those plans that are already out there to see what the community has already said they wanted. And so, if we're doing strategic planning, all these different groups separately, and they're going out and asking the community, 100 different times what they think should be better about, the place where they live, work, and play, the same thing's going to be said multiple times. And so why not collaborate together to find out that same thing? And so that's kind of aligning some community goals, is that, as a foundation, you can say, well, our economic development plan has discovered that, there's the opportunity to, have different things going on within the community. And so, figuring out how you can tie into that is very helpful. So some things go wrong every once in a while. So culture eats strategy for breakfast. All those little ducks are in a nice little row are now in a crowd, and it's hard to see through them. And so it happens. And so, being flexible is really important. But one thing I tell a lot of my foundation clients is that sometimes all money is not good money. And so, don't be an ambulance chaser. Don't chase the money, wherever it's at in the community, because really, there's many, many opportunities for donors to give philanthropically nowadays through different, different methods or whatever. And so, you don't always have to say yes to accepting money. And I know that's a little controversial for most community foundations, because we want we want to help donors, but, sometimes we're just not in the position to do what they would like to do. And so, and being that convener and catalyst and connector, we want to, help them and connect them to the best opportunity then. Another thing is, about different community issues. Community foundations are always looked at to when there's a community crisis, a community issue. And so, really all foundations are, but by not taking a stance on an issue, you inevitably take a stance on an issue. So if you don't jump into action for something, someone else will. They'll receive the funding and the recognition. But if you're just ignoring community issues because you're like, oh, we don't want to get involved in that, you have then taken a stance as not wanting to be involved in that. And so I know a lot of community foundations attempt to be Switzerland. They want to be neutral. And that's really great in theory, but in practice, it's really hard to do that because you are a community institution. There's this research out there about anchor institutions in the communities, and they're oftentimes universities, hospitals, schools, and really I would argue community foundations are anchor institutions within communities. And so when crisis hits or when things are changing or when people are looking for guidance, they're going to look towards those anchors in their community and ask, well, what do you think? And so, having an opinion on something I think is very important. So also keeping with flexibility, communities are ever changing and ever evolving. And so just because, you say, oh, we're going to, improve our local park system or, something like that. If there's different issues that happen, throughout the year, your strategy is going to change. And so, keeping strategy flexible enough so you can be aligned with community goals is so important. For example, I have a friend that works at the Central Florida Foundation, and so I initially met her after the Orlando shootings, and she was telling me how her job has just changed. Everything that they had planned for the next, 3, 4, 6 months just got thrown in the trash, and they're like, okay, now we got to do something different. What are we doing about this? And so, they did some really cool things about that, and then, they got back to business as usual. And then a hurricane hit. And so they're like, okay, there goes our strategy again. We're not, throw it in the trash. We need to come up with something different. And so, it's not bad to change your goals and strategies, because community foundations are there to improve and meet the needs of the community. And so, by changing your goals and strategies, I think that's very important. As an anchor institution, as an institution that is there in the community for the betterment of it, I think that's important. So some prospective donors may not be open to contributing to your specific goals and initiatives, and you as a foundation need to determine whether that's okay or not. And so if you're deeply committed to a specific issue for the next 3 years, then maybe going back to not all money is good money, I think is something as well. So aligning roles within community foundations is kind of a unique task because community foundations, some are 100 years old, some are, 30 years old, most of them in Indiana are around 30. But, on day one, potentially when the foundation started, you had like one part-time person or one community volunteer doing everything. And then as the assets grew, the roles grew, and they kind of got spread out over time. And so some community foundations have been very strategic in realigning their roles and changing things up. Some have just been kind of piecemealing positions together. And so, oftentimes within typical roles of foundations, those that are larger and have maybe 4 or 5 staff, you'll often see a program officer and a development officer. So for a program officer, oftentimes when we look at that position, it's often managing grant programs, scholarship programs, and things like that. And so they're doing a lot of the grant reporting, focusing on grants specifically, and they're processing grant requests, processing reports, making sure checks are sent out and everything. And then we have a development officer, which is the other typical role where they're working with all the donors, they're overseeing campaigns, they're communicating with donor advisors, they're processing new funds and things like that. And so this is often what we see with the different roles. And then we have what I think are more aligned roles. And so I like these different titles. I've seen some foundations use them as Community Investments Officer and then Community Engagement Officer. And so I love that they have the word community in it as a community foundation, but really it's splitting these things apart and having one person hold more responsibility of a specific program. And so, the Community Investments Officer will manage grant execution and steward and educate scholarship donors. And so that's important, a distinction. And so at some foundations, the development officer will manage the relationship with scholarship donors, and the program officer will then distribute the scholarship. And so at the foundation I used to work at, we blended those roles together, and it helped so much because when it came time to scholarship selection, we did donor stewardship with that. It made everything so much easier because they knew who their one person was within our foundation. And so another thing a community investment officer may do is manage their nonprofit outreach and engagement, oversee the grant tracking and reporting and things like that. While the community engagement officer's role shifts a little bit, where it's mainly focused on those annual donors, the planned giving, and the sporadic donors, while community investment officers are really more focused on, assisting with, educating scholarship donors. And then I do have on community engagement officer side steward and manage the donor advised fund program, but that could also be switched over to community investment officer too. And so there's a couple different opportunities here that better align things. And so if people come in your foundation and they're confused who they need to talk to, Sometimes you're like, well, you need to talk to so-and-so about this, but then so-and-so really executes that. And so having things within all one person makes it so much easier for donors as well as staff members. So some challenges you might face with realigning goals is that you may not have the right funds to justify the switch in roles. For example, some community foundations are scholarship heavy, and so they have a lot of scholarship funds, and so that takes up the majority of their assets, therefore the majority of their time. And so, saying that, oh, we're going to move the scholarships all over to this one person may not make sense because it wouldn't even out at the end of the day. Staff member reorganization may require some additional training and education. If having some fundraising training or different things for different staff members might be helpful. External individuals may be confused while you're changing the roles. They'll be confused for a period of time, but if you handle the shift well and share, why you're changing things and how it's going to make things better, I think most people would understand the justification. But then also another thing is some staff members may not be open to losing items. If they've been there at the foundation for 10 plus years, it might be difficult. Generally speaking, individuals aren't often afraid of change, but they have a fear of loss. And so, trying to figure out how you can make change within your foundation while not having people incur a ton of loss will be easier for you over time. And so those are my couple highlights. There's plenty of stuff to unpack here. I guess I'll forward here and then we'll go back to questions. But some additional information about how community foundations can better engage donors is available in a SmartSimple guide. And then also in communicating your goals is very important too. And so becoming a social media savvy grant maker is available through SmartSimple as well. These guys are free for you to download. There's some really great information in there. I do have my contact information here. If I maybe spark something in your brain that you want to follow up later individually on, you can send me an email or give me a phone call. Whenever I do a presentation, I offer a free 30-minute consulting strategy session for anyone that's interested. We set up a call, we talk about different things, I hear your issues, maybe how I might solve that, and then we talk about, what consulting could do for you. And sometimes, those are just 30-minute calls and, great, and the person goes off and we stay connected, but they don't work with me, but sometimes they do. And so there's no hook to that. It's just a free thing I like to do to give back to organizations. And so if you have any questions, feel free to submit those in the Q&A box. But if you have any specific questions you want me to talk about a little more later, you can feel free to send me an email.
Great. Thanks, Colton. We'll just give the attendees just a couple minutes to type up any questions they may have. Just to add to what Colton said, if anyone has any additional questions about the SmartSimple platform or suite of our solutions for foundations, or you're interested in setting up a demo where we'll talk about solving your foundation's unique challenges, you can send us an email at sales@smartsimple.com or call us at toll-free 1-866-239-0991. All right, it looks like, Colton, you answered everyone's questions today. Okay, so with that, thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day to join us. We welcome you back to another SmartSimple webinar. Check smartsimple.com/events.html for a full list of upcoming webinars. And feel free to contact Colton with any questions you may have for him at colton@coltonstrawser.com. All right, with that, everyone have a great day. Thank you so much, Colton, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye.